The city never truly slept. Even late at night, distant traffic hummed like restless insects, and the glow of streetlights stretched across the apartment blocks like quiet sentinels guarding the lives inside them. On the third floor of a modest cream-colored building lived Prisca and her husband Baraka, together with their 4 children. Their home was not luxurious, but it was full of life. School bags hung behind doors, children's laughter echoed down the hallway. The smell of cooking spices often drifted from the kitchen window into the warm evening air. Baraka liked to say their home was small, but their happiness was large. He worked as a logistics supervisor for a transportation company in the city. Every morning before sunrise, he dressed neatly, kissed Prisca on the forehead, and stepped out into the busy streets where buses roared and people hurried toward another day of work. Prisca worked at a private clinic as a receptionist. Her days were long and often exhausting, but she carried herself with quiet strength. She balanced work, motherhood, and the endless responsibilities of caring for a home with the grace of someone who understood that survival in the city required patience. Their 4 children filled the apartment with endless energy. There was always someone arguing over homework, someone laughing too loudly, someone running down the hallway when they should have been asleep. Yet every evening, when the family gathered around the dinner table, Baraka would lean back in his chair and smile. "This," he would say proudly, looking at his children, "is the real wealth of a man." Prisca would shake her head and laugh softly, but she knew he meant every word. For many years, life continued this way, steady, hard-working, peaceful, until the day everything changed. It happened on a Thursday evening. Baraka came home earlier than usual. Prisca noticed the moment he stepped through the door that something was wrong. His shoulders sagged slightly, and his face looked pale. "You're home early," she said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Work was heavy today," he replied quietly, lowering himself onto the couch. Prisca frowned. Baraka was not the kind of man who complained about work. She brought him water, but as he drank it, his hand trembled slightly. Later that night, as the children slept, Baraka suddenly clutched his chest. The pain was sharp and frightening. Prisca rushed him to the hospital, her heart pounding as the car sped through the dark streets. Doctors worked urgently. Machines beeped. Voices echoed down sterile corridors. But despite their efforts, before the sun rose the next morning, Baraka was gone. The news struck Prisca like a violent storm. One moment her world had been steady and familiar. The next moment it had collapsed into silence. Her children cried uncontrollably when they learned their father would never come home again. The youngest did not fully understand, but sensed the grief hanging heavily in the air. The funeral was crowded. Friends came, neighbors came, and Baraka's relatives arrived from far away. At first, Prisca believed they had come to support her. She welcomed them into the house with the politeness expected of a grieving widow. But slowly something began to change. The whispers began. The relatives sat together in corners of the living room while their eyes wandered across the house. They examined the furniture. They discussed the car parked outside. They asked quiet questions about Baraka's job and the ownership of the house. Prisca felt uneasy, though she could not fully explain why. 3 days after the burial, the tension finally surfaced. Baraka's eldest uncle called Prisca into the living room where several male relatives were seated. Their faces were serious, almost cold. The uncle cleared his throat. "Prisca," he began, "now that Baraka is gone, we must settle family matters." Prisca nodded slowly, unsure where the conversation was going. The uncle gestured around the house. "This property belongs to Baraka's family." For a moment, Prisca thought she had misunderstood him. "I'm sorry?" she said quietly. Another relative leaned forward. "A woman cannot inherit a man's property. Everything here belongs to his blood relatives." Prisca stared in disbelief. "But this is our home," she said. "My children grew up here." The men exchanged glances. "That does not change our decision." Within days, the situation turned cruel. Baraka's car was taken away first. Then the television disappeared. Furniture was carried out of the living room by men who didn't even look Prisca in the eyes. Important documents from Baraka's desk vanished. And finally, one morning, the uncle returned with several relatives and delivered their final command. You and the children must leave. Prisca felt the air leave her lungs. Leave? She repeated. This house belongs to the family now. There was no kindness in their voices, no sympathy, just cold determination. That same afternoon, Prisca and her 4 children were forced out of the house they had lived in for years. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Prisca's life. She moved from one temporary place to another with her children. Sometimes they stayed with friends. Sometimes distant relatives allowed them to sleep in cramped rooms. The children grew quiet. Their once lively laughter disappeared. One evening, her youngest son asked softly, "Mom, are we going back home?" Prisca felt her heart break. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, she sat alone by a small window in the cramped room where they were staying. The city lights flickered outside. She thought about Baraka, about the life they had built together, about the injustice that had stolen everything from her children. Slowly, determination replaced despair. Prisca stood up. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she visited a lawyer. She explained everything. The lawyer listened carefully and asked an important question. "Do you have documents proving the house belonged to your husband?" Prisca nodded. She had kept copies of many important records. Baraka had always been organized. The house had been purchased legally in his name. After reviewing the documents, the lawyer leaned back in his chair. "You have a strong case." And so, Prisca did something few people expected. She took Baraka's relatives to court. The legal battle lasted months. Many people doubted her chances. Some advised her to give up. But Prisca refused to surrender. She attended every hearing. She endured the whispers of relatives who tried to intimidate her. She endured long days and exhausting journeys between work, court, and caring for her children. But she never stopped. Because she was fighting not just for herself, she was fighting for her children's future. The day of judgment finally arrived. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. Baraka's relatives sat confidently, believing tradition would protect them. But the law told a different story. The judge spoke firmly. The property legally belonged to Baraka. He paused before continuing. Therefore, the rightful beneficiaries are his wife, Prisca, and their 4 children. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. "All property taken must be returned immediately," the judge declared. Prisca felt tears fill her eyes. Justice had finally spoken. Weeks later, Prisca and her children walked back into their home. The same familiar walls welcomed them. The same hallway echoed with footsteps. But the house felt different now. It stood as proof that courage could defeat injustice. Neighbors who once doubted her now greeted her with deep respect, because Prisca had done something remarkable. She had refused to remain silent, and because of her bravery, her children would never forget one powerful truth. Justice may take time, but it always finds its way home. Those who hear this story remember the lesson it carries. Greed may try to steal what is not theirs, but courage and truth will always defend what is right. And sometimes the strongest warrior is not a king or a soldier, but a mother fighting for her children.